So, the war with Grandpa is, contrary to what it looks like, this is not a sequel to 2016's Dirty Grandpa. And, uh, and first off, I'm sorry for bringing back Dirty Grandpa. I'm sure no one wants to remember that film where Robert De Niro, said vulgar words, grabbed people by the privates, and, had raunchy sex. There's good and bad news. The good news is the war with Grandpa is not the sequel to that film. Thankfully, it's a PG domestic comedy. The bad news is I think it might be a little morally worse than Dirty Grandpa. I'm not quite tempted to say that I wish this were the sequel to Dirty Grandpa, because at least with Dirty Grandpa, like, on a surface level, there are reasons that are easy enough to explain why I didn't like it. The comedy didn't work for me. I didn't like seeing Robert De Niro in these positions where he's grabbing at taints and, making fart jokes. It didn't appeal to me. The war with Grandpa is a little bit harder to dissect, but when you dissect it a little bit more, it's just as appalling, if not more so, I think. So the premise is that Robert De Niro plays Ed, just a cranky old guy. He can't figure out the automatic checkout at the supermarket. He gets in fights with anyone under the age of 50, maybe even like 60. Like, at one point he harasses a supermarket employee who is clearly in his 40s, I think. So he's just a cranky old guy, and it's all the stereotypes. An old guy who can't adapt to the world around him. In my day, things used to be better, So his daughter, played by Uma Thurman, suggests that, Dad, you're too cranky. You can't live this lifestyle. So why don't you come and live in my house with my family? It'll be better for you. You can find a new life after having lost your wife. So, there's a little bit of like somber melodrama there, or, you cue the clarinet, that you typically have in these family dramas. And so Ed comes to live in the house. Now, at first, Ed seems like a good fit. Like, it seems like he's reeling himself in, because he realizes, look, if relatives come to live with you, it's a bit of a nightmare, and he realizes, like, look, if I need to make this work with her family, because she has 3 kids and a husband, so he realizes, if I need to make this work, I'm gonna play ball. So, he's very sweet and kind to the youngest granddaughter, because she's just a chipper girl who likes Christmas, and that's all their character, so it's hard to get mad at her. Who he does form a vendetta with. Well, the vendetta is more brought on by the grandson. Is the grandson of, I forget, Peter. Peter, played by Oak Fagley. And Peter is essentially the underdog character, well, he's intended to be the underdog character. He's bullied at school. He feels like his life is just going to hell, kind of like the wimpy kid stereotype. And then he has his room taken over by Grandpa, and they position him in his room because his room it's on like the 2nd floor, I think, and it's perfectly positioned for the bathroom. And so they end up moving up Peter into the attic. Now, at first, this would seem kind of cool to me, because, like, the attic, it feels like a whole floor to yourself. I mean, yeah, there's bats up there, and that kind of sucks, but you could maybe deal with the bats. There are ways to get them out of there. It feels like, because, like, even, like, after he moves, it feels like the attic looks a lot cooler than his room on the 2nd floor. But no, Peter is adamant about this. Like, this is like the final straw for him. He views this as an act of colonialism. Or imperialism, rather, and feels that, my land and territory has been invaded into. Now, thankfully, the film starts with this, and it never fully leads into it, thank goodness. What it does, however, fully lead into is the act of war. Like, Peter doesn't just decide, like, I'm going to pull some pranks on Grandpa because I'm mad at him. He actually writes a declaration of war towards his grandpa for prank wars. Now, rather than Ed trying to find a way to resolve this, because it seems like he does well with his other grandkids, for this grandkid in particular, and this is mostly egged on by his pals, played by Christopher Walken and Cheech Marin, he decides that, well, you know what, I'll entertain it, and I'll fight it just like a real war. And by this point in the film, you got to be saying to yourself, this is such a non-issue. Why are they starting this prank war? Because it's clear that, Ed is not trying to be mean or anything. He just happened to come in and take this room because it benefits him most for, being an old guy and, being so, having like less of a risk by not living in the attic. It would feel like this is such a non-issue. So why are they starting this war on this? And more importantly, they set up the stakes of like how they go about the prank war, but then who wins the war? Is it when Ed moves out or Peter secedes and just agrees to let Ed have his room? And like how far does it go here? And here's like the really stupid thing too is like this film wants to make a point about how war is not fair, even when you have all these declarations and meetings and negotiations. And yes, this is a real part of the film. They actually have war negotiations in this film, and it's meant to be treated like cute and silly because they have the granddaughter as a mediator, which, I mean, I guess from like the setup is kind of cute, but in the grander scheme of what this film is about, it feels so surreal and bizarre. And like the pranks, the pranks range from either, predictable and unfunny to just like downright crossing the line in like decency. Like for instance, I think this is best exemplified with the use of a smartphone. In the beginning of the prank war, Peter uses a smartphone to wake his grandpa up in the middle of the night with inappropriate music. Okay, haha, whatever, it's not that great a prank, but whatever. It's predictable enough that a kid would do this. By the time we get to the second act of the film, Peter resorts to making his grandfather's smartphone go off with inappropriate music at a funeral. And then the phone, because like Ed's, bit of like a clumsy person, his phone dumps into the casket of a friend he knew at his funeral, so he has to dig around in his dead friend's pants for the smartphone. And that's just crossing the line. That's too far for like comedy here. And you think that is where the line would be drawn, where they realize that, maybe we have to stop this prank war. But it's not. It's not until it actually involves like structural damage to the house that happens. And it's so stupid that that the film would resort to that, because like a lot of people, like the excuse to that would be, well, Peter didn't make Ed's phone fall into the dead guy's pants. So you can't blame Peter for that. That was just a funny accident. The thing about that is I'm not mad at Peter because Peter doesn't exist. His actions are mutable by whatever this film wants to showcase. And it felt the need that there could be some humor from having Robert De Niro dig inside the pants of a dead guy at his funeral while everyone else in the church is like, oh, what the humanity. Oh, so funny. I want to remind everybody, this is a PG film meant to be a comedy for the whole family. And, ooh, boy, does it not work in terms of like both the comedy that's put forth, but also the greater message. Like, because literally this film wants to make a point about how war is terrible and you never want to go off to war. And this is a point that Peter actually learns in this film, or at least the film wants us to believe that Peter learned this lesson. That, he basically comes to his grandpa and says, war is terrible and it hurts people and I never intended that to happen and I hope I never go off to war. And it's all tearful. It's like, you live in goddamn suburbia, kid. This is not the best way to learn about war. This film, like if this film was just like a mindless prank war, like there's none of this like declaration and talk about imperialism and how hard war is and how war is hell, it would have been just mindless and dumb and I wouldn't have minded. But because the film wants to go into this direction, it just misfires so poorly, especially since their prank war doesn't really have like, as if you've seen stuff like Daddy's Home and stuff like that, a lot of these like domestic slapstick comedies, it's pretty par for the course. And like recognizing that they've gone too far and that war is hell, that really doesn't come across when so many of these other domestic slapstick comedies delve into the same area with the same stunts and the same scenes, and they don't question them either. And especially because this film wants us to laugh at all this stuff. It wants us to laugh at the fact that Robert De Niro is pranked into putting like concrete on his face instead of shaving cream. It wants us to laugh, at the fact that, Peter brings inappropriate homework into school and ends up getting an F. And like all this comedy built up over such a non-issue. And what's even worse is how many big names they get in this film. Like Uma Thurman here plays the angry mom who, like, at one point, there's a great moment where it feels like they've given Uma Thurman a moment to explode. Similar to other her more action-packed roles, and it feels like she's just about to cross that line, and then like it feels like there's a light that went off in her. It's like, oh wait, this is a PG film. I can't do this, and they pull her out of that. Christopher Walken here is trotted out just for slapstick. Like his whole bit is he keeps falling down and then says the word, "Oh, that was epic," and he says this multiple times. So. Hey, fellow kids. And then you have Cheech Marin, who does basically nothing but provide commentary. And then Jane Seymour, who basically fills out, the fourth wheel in their elder ensemble pack. Because there's a moment where it's basically elders versus kids in a dodgeball scene, which I'm sure is at like some company that does like trampolines for kids and dodgeball and all that. There's no real stakes to it. It's just like, here's a funny scene where they all play dodgeball and hit each other in the nuts and then insult each other. And that's about it. And, oh man, poor Rob Riggle. Once again, Rob Riggle, an actor who has to play the suburban dad. Once more, he's playing it again here, and his only bit here is that he constantly walks in on Robert De Niro in the nude and has to scream at his penis. Twice. This happens in the film. Twice, Rob Riggle has to look at Robert De Niro's penis and scream. Comedy for the whole family. Whole family. The war with Grandpa. And of course, since it's in suburbia, everything's like decadent. They live in, like I said, there's an attic here. It's a family of 3. They live in a huge house in this wonderful neighborhood where nothing could possibly go wrong. And then we have to talk about the horrors of war because one kid had to move out of his room and into the attic. Yeah, like when I was a kid, when I moved out of my room into the basement, that was like the best thing ever. I don't know what is this kid's deal? Like, what is the problem here? And like there's a whole like Christmas party because the girl loves Christmas and that she wants for her birthday party, and of course both Ed and Peter ruin it because of their war, and they realize, man, maybe we should have called off this war. It's like, really, this is when you call off the war? It's not when, you started dealing with dead bodies and ruining your academic career. No, it's once you ruined a birthday party. Now you've gone too far. So it's welcome to the rock. So welcome to the rock, I guess. Yeah. So the war with Grandpa, it could have just been a pointless, meandering, brainless comedy, but because it feels like it's actually trying to make a point, it comes off even worse than it should. So, The War with Grandpa. 1 out of 5 stars.